All right, so we're starting this new arc of Is God Omnipotent? Now, we often use that language sometimes, all-powerful, omnipotent. What does it mean? So the Nicene Creed and also the Apostles' Creed opens with the confident words, I believe in God the Father Almighty. Now, belief in an almighty God has thus traditionally been an essential kind of element of Christian faith. It's almost been taken for granted. But what does it mean to speak of God being omnipotent or all-powerful? The common sense approach to the matter defines omnipotence like this. If God is omnipotent, then God can do anything. Of course, God cannot make a square circle or a round triangle. This is a logical self-contradiction, though people sometimes often try to use those examples to challenge the power of God. But as C.S. Lewis says in The Problem of Pain, just because you say something nonsensical and put God in front of it doesn't suddenly make it sensical. But the idea of divine omnipotence seems to imply that God must be able to do anything which does not involve obvious contradiction. Now, there's this heavy stone problem. A more subtle problem is raised by the following question. Can God create a stone which is too heavy to lift? If God cannot create such a stone, the idea of total divine omnipotence would seem to be denied. Yet if God could create such a stone, then there's something else God cannot do, namely lift the stone. And so again, God turns out not to be omnipotent. Philosophers like to sit around and think of these things. Fun times. Now, such logical explorations are unquestionably valuable in that they cast light on the difficulties of speaking about God. God's a whole other category of being. How do we fully understand who God is? We've talked about that in the last series with Christology. We know God because of Jesus. And we don't see Jesus being all-powerful. And we talked about the communication of attributes, and does all of the attributes of God go to the human? Does all the human attributes go to God? We'll talk more about that in the Christology series. But one of the most important rules of Christian theology is to carefully consider the meaning of words. Words with one meaning in a secular context often have a more developed, subtle, or nuanced meaning in a theological setting. Omnipotence is an excellent example. So next week, we'll kind of dive into this idea of what does almighty or omnipotence in this theological setting actually mean. But first, we have to talk about those pesky Greeks again. If you remember from our last series, Greek philosophy has kind of infiltrated so much of theology. I'm reading this book about the American buffalo and how it came to be and its role and all these things. It's been interesting as I've been reading about how animals got to the United States. Often the things we think of as being very American didn't really start here, but they've been here for so long. Like horses. We think of the indigenous people riding horses and all this stuff. The Spanish brought the horses to Mexico, and then they filtered up through the rest of America. But they've been here so long, we kind of just think America, horses, the Wild West. But they weren't originally part of this land. That happens with Greek philosophy. As Christianity spreads, they get us in touch with Hellenism, Greek philosophy, and it just kind of gets infiltrated in like the spotted lanternfly. It's here, it's everywhere. We think it's going to be here forever. 1,000 years from now, people will think it's always been here. Hope not. It's probably going to be the case, though. So Greek philosophy kind of infiltrates in, and people assume, well, the Greeks are smart. They said this. Let's just kind of latch on and have this belief. So the idea of the omnipotence of God gained popularity only when Christianity spread to the Hellenistic world. This idea wasn't really part of Jewish thought in the Hebrew scriptures. You don't see the idea of this omnipotent God. In fact, in a lot of the Hebrew scriptures, you see multiple gods, and they have to fight for power, that God is doing all God can to hold the forces of chaos at bay. You don't really start seeing this idea of one all-powerful God till later, and even then, they wouldn't really use all-powerful till after they've had all this contact with the Hellenistic world. You don't see the idea of an omnipotent God in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew scriptures. But once again, that characteristic isn't as prevalent or even considered in biblical writings as omnipotence. But it's filtered so much in that you look at some of the creeds, even in our book of Confessions, It'll have attributes like omnipotent in the creed. But it's not very biblical. That's how much Greek philosophy just kind of burrows its way in and sticks around. So maybe this is one of those other ideas from the Greeks that need to be purged in our thinking of God. So some things to think about this week. What does it mean to you that God is omnipotent? What problems does it create to have an omnipotent God? What problems does it create to not have an omnipotent God? Certain things I think about, one of the things I think the reasons we like the idea of an omnipotent God is we want someone to be in charge. We want someone to be able to do anything to fix any problem. We want someone to be all powerful. It's somewhat true in the Avengers movies with all the Avengers and stuff. Loki, Norse god, comes in and he tells humans, you always want someone to serve. You are cattle. You want someone to tell you what to do. Everybody's no, we don't. We want our freedom. But ultimately, often we want someone else to be in full charge, that can fix any problem, that can be powerful enough to just snap their fingers. I think at every point in our lives, one of us has wanted God to do something that seems impossible to fix some problem for us. I don't know of anybody who's probably never been if God could just do this, if God could heal that, bring him back, make this happen. We kind of long for it, don't we? There's also problems with it. I think also, too, we want everything to happen for a reason. I probably hear that at least once a week. I believe everything happens for a reason. I think we want that to be true because it's hard to imagine a life in a world where things that hurt and have pain don't have a reason behind them. You'd almost rather be some bad reason than no reason at all. But do we really? I have a hard time with always finding a reason why millions of Jews are killed in the Holocaust. Why a little baby dies a month old. Why a 14-year-old girl is raped. Want a reason for that? And go to God for that? God, tell me why this happened. Sometimes there aren't reasons. Has anybody ever read through the whole book of Ecclesiastes? It's one of my favorites. And I think it really has a lot of wisdom for our world now. And I want to have a series on Ecclesiastes, but I've already got all of 2023 planned out, and it's not there. I may have to wait till 2024. There's some other good stuff to do. I don't know. I may have to slip it in or do a Bible study on it. But I love Ecclesiastes. But it's hard. He'll throw some truth bombs at you. One of his things is, hey, listen, sometimes things just happen and they stink and there's no reason. 5 birds will be flying, one gets caught in a snare, it dies, the rest live. And there's no reason those 4 lived and that one died. Sometimes bad things just happen. There's a bumper sticker that has a similar slogan I'm not going to say, but you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes bad things just happen. We're going to get into that a lot more over the next several weeks of how that is kind of portrayed in the Bible, why that is, because there actually is a reason why these bad things are allowed to happen in the larger framework of the divine and contingent order God created. There's a whole book by a guy named T.F. Torrance called Divine and Contingent Order, where it kind of looks at how God is active in the world, how the world was created, and the role God plays in that. I want you this week to think about why it might be nice and a good thing and a comforting thing to have an omnipotent God. And I bet we all can name some good reasons. Then I want you to kind of name, why might it not be so good to have an omnipotent God? And then the question is, if God is omnipotent, does God use the full extent of God's powers? There's a whole branch of kind of philosophy called fatalism, where every single thing is planned out and dictated by the all-powerful God. That nothing we do is ever our choice. Everything is dictated by God. And sometimes we like that. Everything has a reason. But the negative is there's no real love because there's never a choice. There's no real gratitude. There's never a choice. There's no real just good things someone does because it was never a choice. And while there might be a reason for everything, everything loses its meaning, which I think is the bigger loss. I'd rather have meaning than reason. That's just me. We'll talk more about it in the next couple of weeks. Next week, we'll kind of dig into that word, omnipotent, almighty, that's in the creeds, etc. Any questions? Cindy?
Are omnipotent and almighty the same thing in what you're describing?
No. And we'll get into that next week. It's nuanced, and people often use the same. But again, omnipotent is kind of this Greek philosophical word, all-powerful. Almighty has, the way it's translated, it's not the same word in the Greek. It has a little bit different take. And we're going to get into that more next week. And so you better be here, because I'll answer that question more fully then. Other questions? All righty, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week.